I would love if you could share the experience that you had when you were at the agency on the day of 9/11.
Sure.
And some of the leadership that you saw come out of that day.
Yeah. So that day, Kofor and I had a 9 a.m. appointment with Condoleezza Rice. This was before she was Secretary of State. She was the National Security Advisor. And I'm going to use the word quaint again. It was a very quaint reason. It's laughable now that we needed to see somebody as important as Condoleezza Rice. The government printing office, the GPO, was getting ready to publish a book of historical State Department cables. And it was called Foreign Relations of the United States, Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, 1947 to 1969. Okay? Nobody's ever going to read this book. Maybe there's a PhD candidate in history, maybe that someday might reference it. But nobody's really going to read this book. But of the thousands of cables that are included in this thing, there were 3 that mentioned CIA sources who were still alive. So we have to at least offer them relocation, $1 million to live on, relocate their families. 17 November was still a threat. And we couldn't take the chance of somebody saying, some Greek reporter, oh my God, look, there are these 3 guys. They worked for the CIA in 1952 and, they're still alive. So we made an appointment with Condi Rice to ask her to just pull these 3 cables out. Nobody would know, right? She's like, absolutely not. We said, well, we need to see you in person. So we made the appointment for 9 a.m. At 8, I got a call from the driver saying that he was waiting for us at the west entrance and he's going to take us to the White House. So I go up to Kofor's office to tell him that the car's ready. And his secretary, she had a little TV on her desk. Back then, you couldn't watch TV on your computer back then. So she has the TV on and the news is on and one of the towers of the World Trade Center is burning. And I said, what happened to the World Trade Center? And she said, a plane flew into it. And I said, because I'm an idiot sometimes, I said, that happened once before. In 1932, a bomber flew into the Empire State Building, but it was really foggy and raining then. It's crystal clear today. Like, how can you not see that you're flying into the World Trade Center? And just as the words came out of my mouth, the second plane hit. And then she turned to me and she said, did you see that? Or did I imagine it? And I ran back to my office and I said, guys, 2 planes just hit both towers of the World Trade Center. I think we're under attack. Everybody ran back up to Kofor's office because we had TVs mounted coming down from the ceiling above his office. So we had CNN, MSNBC, Fox, BBC, RT. Back then it was called Russia Today. Or back then I think it was even called Russian television. France 5, whatever. And then a plane hits the Pentagon. And it's silence. I mean, there are like 300 of us. We're working in this enormous bullpen. So around the walls, there are private offices for the leadership. Kofor, the Deputy Director for Analysis, Deputy Director for Operations, Deputy Director for Military Affairs, couple division chiefs that I probably shouldn't say what their offices are. But anyway, and then 300 of us are in these cubicles. And there were so many people that the aisles were named as streets, like Bin Laden Boulevard, Winston Wiley Way. He had been a former head of counterterrorism. So they were named after CIA directors and terrorists. And so you could say, I'm in a cubicle at the intersection of Bin Laden Boulevard and Winston Wiley Way. Mm-hmm. So silence as we're watching this unfold. And you might remember, well, no, because you were overseas at the time, but on the ticker, it's like, car bomb goes off in front of the State Department, which turned out to not be true. There was no car bomb. Rumors of rocket fired at White House. There was no rocket fired at the White House. But people were panicking.
Of course.
And then somebody behind me shouts, "Will somebody please lead?" And Kofor was like someone had slapped him. "Right, you go to the director's office and tell him this. You go to security. You go to operations. You know. Finally, one of the CIA cops, the CIA has its own police force. It's called the SPOs, the Special Protective Officers. So Special Protective Service, SPS. He comes in and he says, "Everybody evacuate." We were like, "Yeah, right. We're the counterterrorism center." So nobody budged. One woman ran for her life. She and I used to sit next to each other. She ran for her life. And a couple of days later, all 5 of her branch members, she was the branch chief, they went to Kofor and said, "We've lost confidence in her leadership." And she was fired. I mean, imagine that day we had like 800 employees in the counterterrorism center. It more than doubled after that, but she was the only one who ran away. They fired her.
Do you think that was the right decision?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want
It's moments like that, that are going to define what are you capable of leading.
Right. If you're going to run away at the first sign of trouble, maybe you should be working on France or trade, right? Or Canada or something. Not on terrorism. No. So another hour passed and the cops came back and said, "If you don't evacuate now, we'll place you under arrest." So everybody evacuated. Now I lived about, let me think, 5 miles from headquarters. It took me 2 hours just to get out of the parking lot. And I got about halfway and I had to abandon my car on the George Washington Parkway. It was just gridlock, parking lot. So I just pulled onto the median, got out, walked away. I went to my apartment. My, as I said, then girlfriend, later became my wife, also evacuated. And we met at my place, went to the roof of the building, watched the Pentagon burn for a while. Then we went out and we tried to donate blood. But the bloodmobile, there were bloodmobiles all over the place. And the lines went for blocks. And they told us there's a 24-hour wait to donate blood. And finally, I said to her, "This is ridiculous. We got to get back to work." So I walked back to my car, drove across the median, drove back to CIA headquarters, and then I didn't leave for 4 days. I just slept under the desk. I balled up my jacket and used it as a pillow, and I just stayed for the next 4 days. Everybody did. We had to take bolt cutters and cut the lock off the cafeteria doors, and then we just stole all the food. We cooked it ourselves, laid it out on folding tables in the hall so people could graze, and then we had to write the Marriott. The Marriott owned the company. It was called Saga back then. They had the contract for the CIA cafeterias. We had to write a check for $10,000 for all the food that we took. Yeah, but everybody just stayed.
Yeah. At the time, it really rooted out people that maybe were at the agency for, just the paycheck, and the ones that really had the passion for doing something
for
the mission, protect America and preserve, our well-being at the time.